Chinatown Police Station is probably one of the more miserable places to be locked up in the world. It's bars within mesh. The cell was small. People in there very despairing. There were 3 foreigners on sort of seaweed mats sitting in there, all facing either the death penalty or life sentences. A Swiss guy I met in there tried to commit suicide with how many did he take? 160 Rohypnol. You'd think that would do the job, but he was immobile for 2 days and then eventually began to crawl around. But I was later on told that if you really want to do the job properly, it's quite difficult. You can take all the sleeping pills, but then you've got to tie a plastic bag around your head. I mean, I'd start laughing before I got finished, This tape's not holding, damn it, There's a bit of decent gaffer tape when you need one. In fact, that really is the thing that, one of the things that stopped me from, I was so miserable after all of that, really in that Chinatown police station, that I thought, why go on? If I'm going to be this unlucky all of my life, this is never, ever going to work.
Is this after the interview?
Yeah, the interview was something silly. Some Thai police captain who knew nothing and a translator who was part of the tourist police. He'd ask in Thai, because drugs had been brought into it from a sweep of the airport, whatever was lying on the floor at the time. And somebody had abandoned a suitcase there and it had a few hundred grams in it. But that was enough. Anything over 25 grams in Thailand is the death penalty if it's from the airport. So he'd ask, was the money you had to buy drugs in Thailand? I'd say to the translator, I didn't come to Thailand to buy drugs. And she would translate back in Thai. He says he was too scared to buy the drugs at first. So it's getting, in the end, I didn't know much Thai, but I could tell it was all coming out backwards. And even more jumbled because she wants my boots. No, you can't have boots in Klong Pem. No boots for prisoner. You have flip-flop. So you give me a boot. And she's going through my wallet saying, oh, telephone card. I like telephone card. My boyfriend collect telephone. Yeah, and look, there's death penalty somewhere. It's between the telephone cards and the boots. There's something about facing the machine gun. So I thought, well, this will all have to go away soon. I've got serious suicides to commit on myself down here. Let me get back to the cells.
So they're just to clear this up then. They're basically now holding you on the grounds that they found some evidence. Someone else had abandoned some drugs at the airport.
Yeah.
And they're saying because you were at the airport, they were your drugs.
I was
and
at
now
the
you've got
airport.
the death penalty.
Right. I was at the airport. I ran away. I'm responsible for everything that's now left on the airport floor.
Right.
Fine. So they could have picked something else. Anyway, I know I have 2 passports, which that's only worth about a year there. A passport, but the money, the 50,000 quickly became 5 and then became a few hundred. That was money my friend Lee had kept for me. And
was that money being held?
Well, it was in my travel bag. But
also, the police are taking that.
Oh yes, they've taken that. So I don't see that again. Because she said straight away, "Why did you have 5,000?" Well, yeah, because I got robbed.
So you're thinking, there's my money for a lawyer gone, the police have stolen it?
Oh, I knew enough about Thailand and everything to know that everything, you have 2 choices there. You can either have somebody run down to the police station straight away and get you out. You've got 7 days to do that. If that doesn't happen, I think that's why the 7 days exist.
Well, how much does that cost?
Depends on the case, but if foreign devils are involved, that's much harder. If you are not Thai and you can manage to keep your embassy out of it, you've got some chance of getting out. if the case was less than a kilo, yeah, you can pay your way out.
So were you grasping onto that hope?
No, I assumed I'd be deserted by everybody.
Okay.
In that part of the world. Oh, they'd get around to sniffing about to see what remained of me afterwards, but not for quite some time. Because, of course, they get dragged in, which is not actually the case. I've intervened in things before and gone into police stations in Colombia and certainly in India, Pakistan, and never feared being dragged in on it.
This will be parts 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Well, anyway, yeah, a very depressing place, this cell in Chinatown police station. There's no light. I saw
No
through...
light?
No, I mean, there is a blinding fluorescent tube up the top, but there's no daylight, just a kind of oily grill up the top where you can get a few street fumes of carbon monoxide, and your clock is the fact that the traffic sounds are different and the street sellers. It's a little taunt. You can hear the real world. You feel like one of those science fiction movies where there's a glass screen between yourself and that's all he's ever got. And it didn't help that Swiss Freddy had been busy killing himself. And I hadn't worked out the means yet, and then had to listen to some really poor slob from, where was he from? Ghana, I think. Hard to say. A lot of the African guys had passports from all over the place, but usually they were from the English-speaking African countries. He ended up signing for some water coolers down at the ports, which had 27 kilos of heroin in them. I think he was, his story, his dream, shall we call it, because it became his defense, was that he was paid to come to Thailand to buy jeans because they were cheap and sell them in Africa. I mean, it's so thin, that story. It's not what you take from Thailand. Anyway, but he's certainly tearful enough to, he told me all about his sweetheart back home in the village that was expecting great things and all of that. So there are lots of cheery stories too. The only people that showed any life was a little huddle of Chinese Thai over in the corner. 7 of them dragged in on a big drug case, 100 and something kilos, deciding amongst themselves, because they knew about the 7-day window, who was going to take the rap and who was walking out. And the old guy was walking out. The one had those long wisps of hair of experience, as the Chinese revere. There was some interesting conversations amongst them as to deciding who would take the fall for this, because potentially it was death.
Good grief.
And if not, it was certainly 20 years at least, in bad conditions, probably sleeping on a mat somewhere. So they bought me a cake. Why? Because this Shaun was 3 days before Christmas. Just to put that extra icing on the cake that I received from them.
Was there no Brits in there to share it with?
No. I didn't come across any real information. Oh, when Freddie came to, he'd been in prison before, in a Thai prison, for stealing a television from a hotel. I mean, this was the quality of the guys in there, top players. So I asked him what the foreigner section was like, and he didn't give me any real solid information. Like, if I'd been in his shoes, I'd say, Shaun, when you get there, you'll go to building 2. That's where most of the foreigners are, if you want. But you might be better off keeping away from them because they're a real downer and everything costs twice as much.
Are you talking about the Bangkok Hilton now?
Yes.
What's the name of it in Thailand?
It's Klong Prem area prison. Klong Prem in Lajao. So it has all the many names. But the section where you first go is called Bambat. Open to misinterpretation, but it's not a shower and soap story. It's Bumbutt because it means the cure.
The cure. So how long are you in the Chinatown jail before you
7 days. I ended up going
7
to
days?
court, herded onto a bus.
What was the court situation like?
Well, on my way there, a Thai guy that I'd befriended in the prison said, the 7 days we just had in the police station. Yeah, that's, well, if it was a Yorkshireman, he was saying that's bloody luxury. That's the good time, apparently. I thought, really? Okay. They have nooses there. I mean, and it's pretty much, and I spend the day in court, which is a riot. People are arranging food. They're screaming to their family and friends through bars. The floors are washed with flooded toilet water. People are rattling around in chains. So I've got some work to do here. I want to know about these chains, why they're wearing them. There was one guy had some fancy chains all polished up. He had little garters to hold them. Interesting man to talk to. Why? Because they were welded on, these chains. That means something, and it ain't going to be good. You know how those chains come off? After you're dead with a machete, your ankles are chopped off, and they take their chains back because they're quite valuable. Welded or not, they cut them off and reuse them. So I found out all about chains and their application, which was if your case was more than 10 grams, was it 50? It doesn't matter. You were automatically thrown into chains because it was a potential death penalty case or life sentence.
Psychologically, after 8 months of relative freedom, now you're facing the death penalty for the first time ever in your life. That's a unique experience. How does that feel? What's going through your head?
Well, once I got over I want to end this.
Could you sleep at night? Was it keeping you awake?
No, you get an exhaustion from just everything burning in your mind and brain over hopelessness and re-examining in great detail every move you've made and what you realize that if there is a destiny, it's not a good one.
Like prisoners, a lot of them grasp onto this pipe dream. If they're doing life in America, I saw that they're going to get an appeal or something's going to happen. Were you grasping onto this isn't going to go all the way? Somehow I'm going to get out of this.
No, the interesting difference here was this was not where there would be a jury trial and there'd be some possibility of winning a case. I accepted from the very moment those policemen walked into that travel agency, and I looked around. I even looked at the gun in his holster and thought, if there's one in the chamber, I'm in business. If there's not, I'm knackered twice over. Don't take the chance, because there's so many things against a bold move like that. They didn't come alone, for example.
Yeah.
It's their neck of the woods. It's one thing to slip amongst a crowd out there as just another tourist, but you don't go around start waving a gun around. And this, we'll call it, I think I mentioned one other thing before, but this will be lesson 2 in the uselessness of guns. But it did occur to me. So there was no hope for anything in the courts whatsoever. And I knew, because when I saw Bill from the DEA and the Australians and the other agencies all involved, and they'd done all of this so they could just test out their equipment. Could they tap a phone live? Could they act on it? Could they get the Thais to jump when they told them to jump? Macmillan, the idiot, no, he's just a lucky day that he's turned up, because they'd said to him, you won't follow him from the airport. He'll get away from there. Oh, no, we'll get him. Well, they didn't. But I'm not really bragging about that. I'm just saying that here's the motivation for the agencies to do it. They've got their little otherwise harmless sucker who's good enough to give a bit of a chase to the agencies they're trying to train up, like the Thais, on their behalf.
And they've got to arrest people like you because they're facilitating the really big guys they're working with, aren't they?
Well, that became clear when I got into the Bangkok prison, how the system worked there. They the Nigerians had a courier network that would recruit from there. And after the poor slob did 4 runs, they'd have him arrested. That was the deal with the DEA, that they would get that 1 in 4 arrest, keep their numbers up. There was even a guy who, where was he from? Portugal. His arrest was supposed to happen at Bangkok airport. He gets out of the taxi, ends up on the plane. The arresting officer didn't get the message, and the Americans were ringing through and so on.
Do you hear that? He's saying, from his experience, massive worldwide experience, that the DEA are up to their necks in the drug trafficking world, profiting from it. And the arrests they make, a lot of them are just staged to justify their budgets, to get more money for equipment, like David's talking about, and arresting the lower level players. Biggest mafias in the world, DEA and the CIA.
Yes, and they also fund counter publicity. Anybody in favor of legalizing drugs and taking away the problem that causes is being labeled as in the pocket of drug lords.
They put them out of business,
which wouldn't make sense at all. It's an irrational business strategy of a drug lord to ask somebody to take away his black market. But no, they were certainly determined. This poor slob from Portugal, he rang them in Malaysia when he got there, saying, "I'm through." Oh, good.
the Nigerian.
Yeah, the Portuguese, the courier rang back. And they virtually said, "What the hell?" And they didn't say, "Oh, you're supposed to be under arrest." But they contacted the DEA man, who said, "Well, send him back in. We'll get him as an importer instead, just as good." So he comes back in with this load. I mean, can you imagine? Could anybody, you've decided to be a courier. You've flown over there to Malaysia, which is like quick death penalty there. Yeah. So you've got through all of that. And then they're telling you to fly back with the shit. Don't you think a little bell would ring in there saying, "I don't think these are good people"? So he comes back in, bang, gets hit at the airport coming in with it.
Expendable.
Yeah. The reason I knew that it was all an arranged thing was that guys would come in there, all with the same background to their arrests. That is, they were recruited. They stayed at the same guest house. It was Joe that saw them. They were taken here by the same sort of people. The drivers were the same. The suitcases came from similar places. And did you spill your guts? Did you tell them all of that? In triplicate, they'd insist. "Oh, yes, no name that I ever heard was left out." What's yours, by the way? Fred. Yeah. Mine, David Schnickelgruber. It's with 2 T's. So, yeah, they'd all told the DEA liaison over there, after your regular arresting officer, another one comes down who feeds information and asks silly questions about villages and hill tribes. And yet this was going on, and I, for something to fill my days, I'd go on other people's embassy visits. So until they banned me, I used to go on the Americans one. And so Judy, that was her name, she was the charge d'affaires or consular for the American guys. She was like a den mother, according to Kevin, the Hawaiian guy. She'd come in, "How are my children getting along?" as they rattled their chains. I didn't have chains because I tore all my paperwork up, having learnt what they meant, and with a wobbly hand handed over a lawyer's card with 23.6 grams written on the back.
So you've entered the Bangkok Hilton in these chains, have you?
No, they attach them once you get there.
Okay, can you describe the entry into the Bangkok Hilton and how your first cell is allocated?
It's late in the day. The bus bumps its way in. You go through a lot of very noisy metal doors and herded into a courtyard and made to squat on the ground. You think it's sort of quiet and peaceful here because there's nobody running around, and that's because they've already been locked up at 4 o'clock. That's the end of their day. They're squished into the dormitories by then. So everybody has to take off all his clothes and squat there naked while the trustees do their work of checking the things you're allowed to have and not have. Your long pants, they either go into so-called stored property, in other words, missing, or you can have them tailored on the spot. They had a pair of big old scissors for cutting the knees off trousers so you could wear them as shorts because they didn't want anybody, it wasn't showing knees. Shoes, again, you couldn't have trainers, but they let you buy them illegally once you were across the line and inside there. Those having chains fitted go over to line up over there where a kind of crinkly old chain squashing machine is in place, which is better than the guy who does it manually, hammering them on. It's a C-ring. Leg through there, C-ring closed around with a hammer. He's usually a good shot with that hammer, wants to be. In fact, if you give him cigarettes, it steadies his hand, apparently. I used to give Packard Tip or Melbourne favourite smokes in there just to make sure his aim was nice and steady, and a few extra for some clean ones.
Before the chains, do you have to do an anal cavity search?
Well, yes, there was a kind of little sheet hanging over a piece of string, and there you could hear little surprise noises. I didn't know what that was, but I could make out somebody was bent over, and you could see a gloved hand. You know what's the creepy thing about the gloved hand? Rubber? No. This was a woolen mitt with 2 brown fingers. 2. I mean, that one's insult. That's injury, you know. So I wasn't having it, but they spared the Europeans that one.
You didn't get that?
Oh, no.
How did you dodge that?
I just looked at the guy and then started asking him something else. Like, who do I see about money here? That throws the corrupt mind so much that he hasn't got anything to do.
And he's got shit all over his gloves.
Yes.
No rubber glove.
I wasn't going to shake his hand.
Rubber glove, take it off.
Oh, no, none of that. And they were pretty rough with the things that people brought in. If they had soap, they'd chop it in half. If they had shampoo, they'd squeeze it out onto a newspaper, and they could fold that up and take it away with them. But I'd been tipped to most of this by, and it's always a good thing, kids out there, to, if you're in trouble, ask somebody who's been in trouble before to give you the nuts and bolts of what happens next, the detail, because you'll find that you've lost the things that you need, address books or numbers or a bit of money, if that's what counts.
Did you have any money hidden on you anywhere?
I had quite a bit, 1,000 baht notes folded up and stashed here and there. And
where exactly did you stash them?
In the hems of trousers.
So they allow you to keep those then?
With the top part, they cut the bottom off. And I complained enough about the bottoms being cut off to misdirect them about that one.
So that was lucky.
So, yes, but also I left 1,000 in an envelope that I thought would be found. So that would be the find. And a guy that was in charge of that. The trustee did all the poking and the roughhousing and the wrecking of things, but sitting in a chair with a long stick, giving the occasional clout to an old face, he'd be saying in Thai to them, "You're back again, Wonky." Whack, good to see you. Street got too much for you, did it? Little bastard. He had and the crazy thing was, the trustees, who were his personal trustees, this guard with the stick, whenever he made some witticism like that, they would crack up laughing in the most false stage laugh and such toading crawlership. It was like some, I don't know, like farcical play where they have a chorus that laughs at everything, They were like that, the trustees. Their guards were great guys that they worked for. And wits, every one of them was a master of comedy. So funny, they had to excuse themselves to throw up because they really hated them, of course.
So you've got these heavy-duty chains being attached to you now. Where do you go next?
No, I've dodged them because they said, "Where's your court papers
Oh,
with the amount on it?"
okay.
It's not that I didn't get them. I got them when I went to court,
I see.
but from day to day inside use, I don't know what. I destroyed all my paperwork, and I just gave him the Thai lawyer's card with the amount written on the back, and they figured, stupid Farang, foreigner, he wouldn't falsify something like this. Why would he? So they wrote it in the book, the amount, and that stayed with me. So I avoided chains pretty much all the way through.
So we're getting moved to a dorm next then without chains. Is that what's going on?
No, chains and unchained were mixed together. So pretty much all of the other foreigners were all chained up because their cases were big enough, including poor old Freddie, who was getting a shoelace to carry the middle bit of his chain link around, tie that in the middle so you don't clank. And he looked at me without them and thought, bastard, And we got packed into a cell which was for the newcomers, the kind of first night center. It was a caring, sharing place. Oh, having gone through a medical, you all right? Yeah, fine. Yeah. And also the trap, some guy who's clearly in their employ, going up to, as a foreigner, saying, "Oh, you want to buy some drugs? I can get you some heroin. You like heroin? Heroin's good." And no thanks. Because as soon as you say yes, two things happen. All your money will be sucked out of you, and then you'll be having an internal nicking for it. Into that cell for the first night, and the cell captain, another prisoner, striding around in Lacoste t-shirt that was probably a fake, but he impressed his underlings with it. And he's got his own little servants who are prisoners.
What does that mean, cell captain?
He would be in charge of that cell. He would keep the ledger with everybody in it. He would allocate spaces.
He does the head count. Is that what you mean, ledger?
Yeah. And make sure there's no trouble first night. Doesn't want anybody dying in a place where it'll make a mess. Everybody else had concrete. He had a little section of linoleum in the corner, which his underlings would prepare and wash and clean and set up his little food and everything like that. And then he'd make a long speech in Thai that my friend was translating, which it was interesting because the world over, I think it was the same speech that all such people make. "Well, guys, you'll find me a hard man, but I'm a fair man. I'll beat you within an inch of your life. Oh, and by the way, I don't want any pissing in the corner toilet tonight. Oh, no. I ask my boys. I can't stand the smell of pee. Oh, no. Can't abide it."
What country was he from?
He was Thai.
Okay.
I'm getting this translated by a very good source. And then watching him, being able to, pick up what the extra little gestures meant. And then he added, just before he settled in, down on his mat, "Oh, by the way, number twos, don't even think about it." Down one end, there's a hole in the ground with a tiny bit of 2 layers of brick, which is the privacy element to that.
I don't imagine there's toilet roll.
Oh, no such thing. No, there is
Squat and shit.
the universal Asian bucket of water there,
Okay.
which you eat with your right hand, you wipe your ass with your left.
Just get some water on there and slap it on and
Splash it all
get
around. And water is...
dingleberries off with the water.
That's right, yeah. or the ones that you've been treasuring, keep them time on it,
It's terribly problematic when you've got a hairy ass like myself in those situations.
It's a life's burden, isn't it?
Need a bidet.
There were no conscious bidets there, except when it rained during the rainy season. There'd be kind of backflow, which would be a kind of brown bidet. But,
Downward dog position with your ass open and the rain coming down.
And the food doesn't help either, does it?
Oh, God. We're going to get to that. What's your first meal here then?
Right. Well, worded up. I'd been I was given a plastic bowl. That's your lifelong bowl for all purposes. That's for food and washing, not in it, but you scoop up water and throw it on yourself, which the foreigners call the bird bath. You'd go to a tank and stand in front of it and and the Chinese would teach you how to take your underwear off while having ankle irons on. Quite a trick. It's like, you know those little magic puzzles you get in cornflakes where you've got two rings and you're trying to undo them and put them back. The same, getting underwear off. It was one leg at a time, looped through the thing. Then, so
in America they had the bird bath. If everything's locked down, in America, bird bath is like you've got your little sink, so you just get naked and soap your armpits and your crotch, and so you don't stink too badly.
Did you find there were some prisoners who didn't like to use the open showers, that they always bird bathed?
Yeah, and there were some prisoners in the open showers who would wear their underwear while showering.
That's become more popular, and interestingly, with the Muslim converts in British prisons, they're all doing that. So if somebody goes in without underwear now, it sounds ridiculous. It's supposedly hardened criminals, and some of the stronger ones sort of ridicule the rest for being like sheep and following on, keeping the boxers on and a special pair for showering in.
Yeah, in America they were making fun of my foreskin, and guys would just come up and like just waggle their penises at me, all tattooed. Look at my tattoos and stuff.
Well, I mean, what do you say to that, Shaun?
You gotta play along, otherwise.
Yeah.
If you're a bad sport, it can go south very fast.
No. You've got to. If you come back with a one-liner there, you're safe. Really.
Yes, humor can diffuse violent situations rapidly sometimes. Yeah,
because I think people are often aggressive because they're feeling you out, aren't they?
Yes.
They're trying to see what your range is.
Probing.
If you don't seem affected by it, they go on to somebody who reacts.
Yeah.
The Thais had some. They had tattoos of all sorts, some of which apparently deflected bullets. And when you hear a story about somebody where the tattoo failed, there'd always be an explanation for it. Oh yes, but he had it in the wrong spot.
Well, I watched the movie A Prayer Before Dawn. My friend Billy Moore, he was in the same prison as you. And it's, the guys, I've got all this jewelry in the cockhead. So it's mushrooming out.
Yeah, and they inject or they push in bits of polished shell and beading. I asked one once what all that was about. And a woman very happy when you have all this. And yet there was I don't think that's the case when there's sort of.
You weren't tempted?
Cauliflower head. No, I don't know. One of the things I resisted there. There's some half-wit injected himself with pure silicon, thinking the word silicon. Oh yeah, people have silicon implants for breasts. So I'll just pump. Well, the wang swollen up to like one of the sort of cucumbers, and he was in agony for quite a while. He survived it though. It didn't actually kill him.
So your first meal and your first sleep, how were they?
Bad, because the kind of reality of it was there. I've got a lot more of this, and there's no. You can imagine when people don't often refer to it, but when there's the chase, the arrest, the processing, the police, the interviews, your own lawyer, somebody else, a courtroom. Transport, at the end of all that, you're suddenly on something that passes for a bed, in this case, a piece of floor. But then the realization that this is now your life, pretty much.
And you're on the floor, just like huddled.
Lined up, because it was packed, as always, except for the room leader's little square over in the corner. We were top to tail. So that you've got some of the guy's feet in your face, and if he's got chains on, that's a bit rattly.
Are the limbs of the next person resting on you and stuff like that?
Yes, sort of flopping over.
That's got to be hard to sleep to get used to in the beginning.
Well, I knew that I'd be moved the next day to somewhere better,
Oh.
but it wasn't so much better. Um, it was the so-called foreigners building, and I looked around at, you know what I'm thinking? I think somewhere in here there's some big players. It's got to be. Um, I've got bail. They've got it set up fine. You know, they're organised in here. They've got their food and sleeping arrangements and all of that. I arrived there, and there's this big range of the the overflow from the world, the people that got blown into the crevices by the wind or something like that. Three-time losers, beggars of all nations, drifters and hopeless cases. Almost nobody that's very big. And the biggest guy in there was some ship's skipper of a not particularly big boat. And he was the fall guy. I think, what did he get for all that support? He had a hammock between two mangy-looking trees, between the toilets and the daytime seats.
And what's the food been like up to now?
Um, the food by comparison, in the court, you can buy little plastic bags filled with a kind of curry, and it's tied at the top. Inside the jail, the food was, that's right, scooped rice, brown rice, with a little garnish of weevils and some other small insects for protein. And that's it. Oh, yes, a rotten cucumber. Not a whole one, but...
No massaman curry, Thai green curry. They're my favourites.
Yeah. No, I didn't see that there,
Oh,
oddly enough. Must have been bad timing on my part. You were in a different section? No, Shaun, it wasn't. It was clear you had to make your own food arrangements. I had a couple of tins of mackerel.
Okay.
And some dry biscuits. But I really wasn't concerned with that.
So you can spend money and to buy food.
Yeah.
You've got money.
Quickly enough, learned the ropes. A guy from Boston befriended me a little too quickly downstairs the next day when I was in the foreigners building. And he told me who to see for changing big notes down to smaller ones and what the local currency was. Now, in the Cure, Bumpart, which was technically the section for drug cases, that you couldn't show money there. Whereas in the other section, the sentence prisoners section, it was completely open about money. They even had a general store with a bank in it. It was still not legal, but they allowed it. But in this place, the Cure, they had to have a pretense of some other currency, which they made out of little sachets of headache powders. Why? Well, they were called tamjai, meaning strong heart. And these little packets, their virtue was they were cheap to buy, but at a fixed price, and they couldn't be forged, of course, because it's too much trouble. So you would buy a packet of cigarettes for, instead of 35p, it would be, say, 35 of these tamjai, which people would carry around in rubber bands. The tamjai economy would be a good Keynesian model of economics for anybody studying how, I think Maduro in Venezuela today would learn something from the tamjai currency system in a Thai jail, because they knew you couldn't flood the market with these things. And when the currency got too battered and old, it was an excuse to destroy a lot. And they'd have a public boiling of it in a vat, destroying or withdrawing it from a saturated market, as it were, and destroy all that. So this was the currency. Had to arrange something that you call a bed, which would be a few blankets sewn together.
And a beard.
Oh, sorry, a bed.
A bed.
Yeah, I was thinking of something else, but it is a bed. Yeah. I was thinking of the accent in which they pronounced bed. It was beard.
Okay.
But where to put the said bed, you had to rent a space within the cell. The dormitory I was put into was built for 1964. had 128 in there. That included the walkway, the surrounds of the toilets. You could buy yourself a bit of cardboard to sleep on in there. It had fans, but it desperately needed something to keep that air in circulation. And you had about a width of 12 or 14 inches, and that was your life.
What's the climate like?
Tropical, steamy, kind of smelly.
Humid.
Yeah. Really so much so that all your time in people would time their days so that they had a major bird bath before lock up, would go upstairs with their little bits of food and pretty much strip down to their shorts and lie on their towels or whatever they had, so they could at least keep cool enough to sleep. I found a couple of doors next to me. When I say doors, they weren't. A couple of people next to me. It was a Thai who'd been in there 20 years in that same dormitory, in that same slither of bed space. As people do, he had his own kind of little hierarchy. He was sort of respected for being around. He had a little workshop downstairs somewhere, which was the only sort of closed room that prisoners had. He took the shells and he was allowed to use the sanding machine to make them the right shape. They took these shells and made kind of mother of pearl paintings out of them, which the guards would sell outside for, I don't know, £50. And they'd get, they'd get next to nothing for a jar of coffee or a few extra tam jai or something. Interestingly, because that I could see how it was so hard to get privacy, because even that one little workshop where the old guy was, he used to rent it out several times a day for gay trysts that would go on. Usually 2 or more often 4 would go in there. Maybe it was cheaper that way. I don't know. If we're going to rent a room, let's,
I was at one prison once where the library basically became an outpost for blowjobs. Yeah.
Really?
Rip-roaring trade.
Why? There was a bit of privacy there, was there?
Yes, there was. There was no librarian at this particular prison, and it was off in the corner of the prison away from the guard tower.
Oh, right. Did you say paid ones?
Yeah, there's a trade in prostitution. There's also people extorting younger prisoners, punks, into just doing things for them, or else they threaten to beat them up and stuff like that.
Right. There was, I gathered from in the Thai prison, it was mostly willing partners there.
Okay.
Some of them used to set up in the dormitory. They'd tie a towel to the back railings of the window or the vents, and the other end kind of nailed down to the floor and make a kind of lean-to. Somebody, my American helper turned to me one night and said, "David, you into the gay scene at all?" I thought, that's not really the thing I wanted to hear on my second night in a prison.
Hey, some of those lady boys look like women.
There was a whole section full of lady boys in there. They had their own building, and they used to have a kind of, open house on Saturdays. You could visit there. There was a German guy who was about like in his 50s, very, Germanic in a cliched way, who ended up visiting there one Saturday, and it changed his life. He said, "David, I got a lady boy last week. You don't know." I think I do. No, it's just, he.
I went to watch the Thai Lady Boy show in Guildford, and then I put a post on, I think it might have been Facebook, and I said, look, if you were in prison and you've gone, like, say 5 years without sex, and the lady boy looked like a woman, and she'd had her man parts removed, she's had the operation, would you contemplate at least receiving oral sex? And half of them were like, yeah, that's be open-minded, just go for it, you'll be so desperate, blah, blah, blah. And the other half were like, no way, that person was born with a penis, blah, 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 blah.
Or did you suspect those who were protesting very loudly
It's always, my
were...
trans friend Zena
yeah.
said it's always the biggest, baddest homophobics
Oh,
that
yeah.
are coming to her for the blowjobs. That's their
I'm not
cover story.
surprised. Not surprised.
So were you tempted, David? Seeing those beautiful lady boys?
No, most of them were pretty ugly.
Okay.
There was no crying game moment of that nature anyway, in my Thai experience. And I think the fact that at that time AIDS was fatal would be another assurance.
It was AIDS quite
Yeah, a lot
prevalent.
of people. In fact, it was so many people were being dying from that. They had a special section of people with HIV and who were on the way out. And I saw it later on the night I escaped. I'd been down there anyway just to kind of check it out. But a very pitiful sight, row after row of people, skin a mottled sort of purpley blue, and a smell that's unique to death, of suppurating skin and pustular sores. Yeah, a smell that I can bring back to mind to this day.
In Billy Moore's book, A Prayer Before Dawn, some people had weaponized by getting syringes with blood with AIDS and threatening, they would fight, or they would threaten to fight you with these syringes, and it was kind of a way they used to
Was it
intimidate or protect themselves. They had these syringes with the AIDS.
And of course, you wouldn't know whether it was genuinely infected or not, and not
Yeah.
willing to take the chance.
Well, in America, people are doing that with hepatitis C as well. If they're going to fight someone, they'd have the hepatitis C syringe right there. Yeah.
Well, I got out of the that section, which was the cure, where things were much more tightly controlled.
How long are you in the cure?
For about 4 months there. The court sessions were once every 6 weeks. They were brief, they were meaningless, nothing happened. I knew I'd be on trial for a couple of years. By the time I shook off this depression, I only saw one person successfully kill himself, an old man who poked his head between the oncoming truck of a sand truck. It was very heavy. He was waiting to go to court. They just put the court chains on. He was sitting on the curbside. As this heavy truck bumped past, he thrust his head underneath, showing great willpower. The rear wheel spun on his skin and tore it sideways, and his head twisted and popped. It sounded like a watermelon being dropped on the ground and opening up. The truck passed. The guard told two of the trustees, "Move that mess, will you?" And they took the remains away, which sort of heavily bobbed on the gravelly ground as the neck was disconnected.
Had you ever seen anything at that level of human fatality before?
I saw some odd things in Lebanon when I was exploring in my teenage years. Somebody had got, they fish with dynamite there, and they throw a little stick of gelignite in, blows up, and the fish float to the surface. Somebody threw one in the wrong place once, and a guy was blown up, and one of my hosts was saying, "Look, he can pull funny faces now because all the bones underneath had been crushed, and so there was no holding strength to the skull, so that was weird." But this, my reaction to that at the time, I was at such a low ebb. I looked on at that and I thought, that brave old guy, now that you've got to admire, doing something you know is going to work. Well, would you? My luck, I just end up a flat-headed guy. Yeah. Okay. Now, I realized once this depression shifted that I had to get out of that.